You crack through your egg case like you're breaking out of prison. It's dark, cramped, and you've been stuck in there for what feels like forever. Around you, dozens of siblings are doing the same thing, pushing, squirming, fighting their way out of their own tiny shells. Some are faster than you, already crawling around on unsteady legs. Others are still stuck, their bodies half in and half out, twitching as they struggle to break free. You don't stop to help anyone. That's not how this works. The world outside is bright and overwhelming. You're small, smaller than you ever imagined you could be. Your legs are thin and wobbly, your body soft and vulnerable. You look nothing like the grasshoppers you'll eventually become. Right now, you're just a nymph, a tiny version of what you're supposed to be, missing the wings and the size that might actually matter. But you're alive, and that's more than some of your siblings can say. A few of the eggs never hatched at all. Others cracked open, but the occupants didn't make it out. Nature doesn't wait for stragglers. Your mother isn't here. She laid these eggs months ago, buried them in the soil, and moved on with her life. She had no interest in being a parent, no instinct to protect or nurture. By the time winter came, she was already dead, frozen somewhere in the grass. The eggs survived the cold because they had to. There was no backup plan, no safety net. Either you made it through winter, or you didn't. You did. Now you're on your own in a world that doesn't care if you live or die. The first thing you notice is hunger, a gnawing, constant need that demands immediate attention. You don't know what to eat yet, but your instincts kick in. You spot a tender green shoot nearby and crawl toward it. Your mandibles work automatically, cutting through the plant fiber. It's not fancy, but it fills the emptiness in your stomach. Around you, your siblings are doing the same thing, each one focused entirely on their own survival. But eating isn't as simple as it seems. This plant belongs to someone else's territory, and that someone isn't happy about uninvited guests. A spider appears from nowhere, moving fast across the ground toward you. Its legs are longer than your entire body, and its eyes are locked onto you, like you're the only thing in the world that matters. You freeze for a split second, every instinct screaming at you to run, but your legs barely work yet. You stumble backward, tripping over your own feet, landing hard on your side. The spider keeps coming. You roll over, scramble to your feet, and hop as hard as you can. It's not graceful, more like a controlled fall than actual movement, but it gets you away from those reaching legs. You land several inches away, which feels like a mile when you're this small. The spider pauses, considers whether you're worth the chase, then moves on to easier prey. One of your siblings wasn't as lucky. You don't look back. This is your introduction to life. Eat. Avoid being eaten. Repeat. There are no breaks, no safe spaces, no adults to protect you. Every meal is a risk. Every moment in the open is a gamble, but you're learning. Your legs are getting stronger with each hop. Your reflexes are getting faster. Your mandibles are getting better at cutting through tough plant stems. You're still tiny, still vulnerable, but you're not the same helpless creature that crawled out of that egg. After a few days, something strange starts happening to your body. Your skin feels tight, like it's shrinking around you. The sensation is uncomfortable, then painful, then unbearable. You stop eating because the pressure is too intense. Your legs lock up, gripping whatever surface you're on, and you can't move even if you want to. Then your skin splits open down the back, tearing like old fabric. You push forward, pulling yourself out of the old skin like you're climbing out of a sleeping bag. The process is exhausting, but when it's over, you're bigger. Not much, but enough to notice. This is your first molt, but it won't be your last. Every few weeks, Your body outgrows its skin and forces you through the same process. Each time, you emerge slightly larger, slightly stronger, with better developed features. Your legs get longer, your mandibles sharper, your eyes more acute. But with each molt comes vulnerability. For hours after shedding your old skin, your new exoskeleton is soft and defenseless. A predator that couldn't hurt you yesterday could kill you easily during those critical hours. You learn to find hiding spots for molting, under rocks, behind thick stems, anywhere that offers protection while you wait for your body to harden. By your third molt, you're noticing things you missed before. The world is full of sounds, clicking, buzzing, chirping, that you couldn't hear when you were smaller. Other grasshoppers are making these sounds, each one sending messages you're starting to understand. Some are warnings about predators, others are claims to territory. A few are something else entirely, something you don't fully grasp yet, but will become important later. You're also getting better at judging distances. Your hops are more controlled now, more precise. You can land exactly where you want instead of just hoping for the best. This skill becomes crucial when a bird spots you from above. Its shadow passes over you, and you react instantly, launching yourself sideways just as its beak snaps shut where you were standing a moment before. The bird wheels around for another try, but you're already moving, hopping in unpredictable patterns that make you harder to catch. After a few failed attempts, it gives up and flies away. You've just passed another test. Food is easier to find now that you're bigger, but it's also more complicated. The tender shoots you could live on as a tiny nymph don't provide enough nutrition anymore. You need hardier plants, tougher stems, leaves with more substance. But these plants often belong to other creatures, ants that swarm anything that touches their territory, beetles that fight for prime feeding spots, other grasshoppers that got there first. You learn to pick your battles. Some fights are worth having, others will just get you killed. You also discover that not all plants are safe to eat. Some taste bitter and make your stomach cramp. Others seem fine at first, but leave you sluggish and confused. A few are downright toxic. You watch a sibling nibble on the wrong leaf and collapse within minutes. You file away these lessons because there won't be second chances to learn them. Every mistake in the wild is potentially fatal. As you grow, your world expands beyond just survival. You start noticing the rhythms of the environment around you. Morning brings dew that clings to everything, making surfaces slippery and dangerous. Midday sun heats the ground until it's almost too hot to touch. Evening brings cooler air and different predators, ones with better night vision and different hunting strategies. You adapt your behavior to match these patterns, staying hidden during the most dangerous hours and being active when the odds are in your favor. Your relationship with your siblings changes too. When you were all tiny and helpless, there was an unspoken truce. Everyone was too focused on basic survival to compete seriously. But now that you're bigger and stronger, resources start mattering more. The best feeding spots, the safest hiding places, the prime territory, these things are worth fighting for. You find yourself facing off against brothers and sisters, testing strength and speed against creatures that share your exact genetic advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't, but you learn something from every encounter. The fights aren't vicious or personal, they're just business. You need food, they need food, and there's only so much to go around. The stronger, faster, smarter ones get the best resources. The others make do with whatever's left or find new territory that nobody else wants yet. It's harsh, but efficient. The system works because it has to. Your fifth molt changes everything. When you emerge from your old skin this time, you feel different immediately. Your body is longer, more robust, with powerful hind legs that can launch you incredible distances. But the most dramatic change is on your back. Small wing pads that weren't there before. They're not functional yet, just hints of what's coming, but they represent a fundamental shift in your capabilities. You're no longer just a ground-dwelling creature that hops from plant to plant. You're becoming something that will eventually claim the sky. The other grasshoppers around you are going through the same transformation. Some are ahead of you in development, their wing pads larger and more defined. Others are behind, still looking more like the tiny nymphs you all used to be. But everyone is changing. Everyone is growing toward the same goal. The differences between you are becoming more pronounced too. Some of your siblings are noticeably larger, with thicker legs and broader heads. Others are smaller but faster, built for quick escapes rather than sustained power. You're somewhere in the middle, not the biggest, not the smallest, but well-rounded enough to handle whatever challenges come your way. Territory becomes more important as you grow. The random wandering of your early days gives way to more deliberate movement. You start recognizing good areas and returning to them repeatedly. A patch of tender grass near a rock outcropping becomes your regular feeding ground. A cluster of broad leaves provides reliable shelter during rainstorms. A section of bare dirt offers perfect spots for warming up in the morning sun. These places become part of your routine, part of your identity. But claiming territory means defending it, and defending it means being willing to fight for it. Other grasshoppers test your boundaries constantly, probing to see if you'll back down or stand your ground. Most of these encounters end with threat displays, raised hind legs, opened mandibles, aggressive posturing that usually convinces the intruder to move on. But sometimes the displays escalate into actual combat. Grasshopper combat isn't elegant. There's no strategy, no technique, just raw determination and the hope that you're tougher than the other guy. You slam into each other with your hind legs, mandibles clicking as you try to get a grip on something vital. Your opponent is roughly your size, which makes this a fair fight. But fair fights are the most dangerous kind. Neither of you has a clear advantage, so it comes down to who wants the territory more. You lock legs, pushing against each other like wrestlers. Your opponent tries to flip you over, but you shift your weight and stay upright. You snap your mandibles toward its head, but it jerks away just in time. The fight moves in slow motion and lightning speed at the same time. Every second feels crucial, but your movements feel sluggish and clumsy. Then you see an opening. Your opponent overextends while trying to grab your antenna, leaving its side exposed. You don't think, you just react, driving your mandibles into the soft joint between its head and thorax. It releases its grip immediately, stumbling backward. There's no real damage. Your mandibles aren't designed to seriously injure other grasshoppers. But the message is clear. This is your territory, and you're willing to fight for it. Your opponent considers its options for a moment, then hops away to find easier prey elsewhere. You've won, but the victory feels hollow. Fighting takes energy you can't spare, and every battle increases the chance that a predator will notice the commotion and decide to investigate. Still, holding territory gives you advantages that make the risks worthwhile. You know where the best food is, where the safest hiding spots are located, and which routes offer the quickest escapes when danger appears. Familiarity breeds survival. When a praying mantis appears at the edge of your territory, you already know exactly where to go. You hop 3 times in quick succession, following a path you've used dozens of times before, and disappear into a tangle of thick grass where the mantis can't follow. If this had happened in unfamiliar territory, you might not have been so lucky. Your sixth molt approaches, and you can feel it building in your body like pressure in a balloon. The sensation is familiar by now, but it never gets easier. Your skin tightens until every movement is uncomfortable, then painful, then nearly impossible. You find a sheltered spot behind a large rock and settle in for the process. This time feels different, though. The pressure is more intense, the splitting more dramatic. When your old skin finally tears away, you're shocked by what emerges. You're huge, not just bigger than before, but genuinely large. A real grasshopper instead of the awkward nymph you've been for so long. Your legs are powerful pistons that can launch you incredible distances. Your mandibles are sharp enough to cut through the toughest plant fibers. Your eyes are compound marvels that can track multiple threats simultaneously. And most importantly, your wings are finally here. They're not just the wing pads you've been carrying around for weeks. These are functional wings, complete with intricate vein patterns and delicate membranes that shimmer in the sunlight. You spread them experimentally, feeling the air resistance against their surfaces. The sensation is unlike anything you've experienced before. You've been a creature of the ground for your entire life, limited to whatever you could reach by hopping. Now the sky is within reach. Your first flight is a disaster. You launch yourself into the air with your powerful hind legs, spread your wings, and immediately discover that flying is much harder than it looks. You spin out of control, crash into a tree trunk, bounce off a rock, and finally land upside down in a patch of thorny weeds. Everything hurts, your wings are scraped, and you're pretty sure you looked ridiculous doing it. But you're also exhilarated. For those few seconds before you lost control, you were actually flying. You were free from the ground in a way that changes everything. Practice makes the difference. Over the next few days, you attempt flight after flight, each one slightly more controlled than the last. You learn to coordinate your wings with your body position, to adjust for wind currents, to judge distances from the air instead of the ground. Your crashes become less spectacular, your landings more intentional. Within a week, you're genuinely flying, not just falling with style, but actually controlling your movement through three-dimensional space. Flying transforms your understanding of the world. Territory that seemed vast when you had to hop everywhere suddenly feels manageable. Predators that were impossible to escape on the ground become much less threatening when you can simply fly away. Food sources that were too far to reach become part of your regular routine. You're no longer bound by the limitations that defined your entire existence up to this point. But flight also brings new dangers. Birds that ignored you when you were a ground-bound nymph now see you as fair game. Your movements in the air are visible from much greater distances, making it easier for predators to spot you. And if something goes wrong while you're flying, a damaged wing, a sudden gust of wind, a moment of disorientation, the resulting crash can be fatal. The ground that used to be your entire world becomes a threat that's always waiting below. You also discover that you're not the only one who's been growing and changing. The grasshopper population around you has exploded as more and more nymphs complete their final molts and join the ranks of the adults. Competition for resources intensifies dramatically. The territory that seemed adequate when you were one of only a few adults in the area now feels cramped and insufficient. Everywhere you look, other grasshoppers are feeding, claiming space, establishing their own territories. The sounds change too. What used to be occasional chirps and clicks becomes a constant chorus of communication. Grasshoppers are calling to each other from every direction, some issuing territorial warnings, others advertising their presence, still others engaged in complex social negotiations you're only beginning to understand. You add your own voice to the mix, stridulating by rubbing your hind legs against your wings to produce your species' distinctive sound. It feels natural, like something you were always meant to do. Your calls serve multiple purposes. They establish your presence in the territory, warning other males to stay away from your claimed resources. They communicate your fitness and size to potential rivals, often deterring challenges before they begin. And they serve another function that becomes increasingly important as you mature, attracting females. The sound you produce carries information about your health, your size, your genetic equality. Females listen to these calls and make judgments about which males are worth their attention. At first, you're not particularly good at calling. Your technique is clumsy, your timing is off, and the sounds you produce lack the complexity and nuance of more experienced males. But like everything else in your life, it improves with practice. You experiment with different rhythms, different intensities, different patterns of sound. You listen to the calls of other males and learn from their techniques. Gradually, your own calls become more sophisticated, more compelling, more likely to achieve their intended effects. Strongest males claim the best territories, and defend grasshoppers becomes apparent quickly. The largest, the hierarchy among the adult attention. Smaller males are relegated to marginal territories oldest, most complex calls, and attract the most femaled them aggressively. They produce the Lao forced to adopt alternative strategies, staying quiet to avoid confrontation, sneaking around the edges of established territories, or forming loose alliances with other subordinate males. You find yourself somewhere in the middle of this hierarchy. You're not the biggest or strongest male around, but you're far from the smallest. Your territory is decent, if not spectacular. Your calls are competent, if not exceptional, and your fighting ability is sufficient to deter most challenges. It's not the dominant position you might have hoped for, but it's sustainable. You can hold your ground, attract some female attention, and have a realistic chance of passing your genes to the next generation. But holding your position requires constant vigilance. Other males test your boundaries regularly, probing for signs of weakness or distraction. Some challenges are straightforward, direct confrontations that end with one of you retreating. Others are more subtle, involving complex displays of size and strength that allow both parties to assess each other without risking actual combat. You learn to read these displays, to project confidence even when you're uncertain, to know when to fight and when to back down. The arrival of females changes everything about the social dynamics around you. Where the males had been focused primarily on territorial disputes and resource competition, now there's a new element that trumps everything else: reproduction. The females are choosy, evaluating potential mates based on territory quality, calling ability, physical condition, and behaviors you're still learning to interpret. They don't commit quickly or easily, often visiting multiple males before making their decisions. When a female finally enters your territory, you feel a surge of excitement and nervousness that's unlike anything you've experienced before. She moves differently than the males, more deliberate, more cautious, evaluating everything around her with calculating eyes. You immediately begin your courtship display, raising your hind legs, vibrating your wings to produce your most impressive calls, and positioning yourself to show off your size and strength. But she's not easily impressed. She ignores your first attempts completely, focusing instead on sampling the vegetation in your territory. You watch as she tests different plants, assessing not just their nutritional value, but what your ability to claim and hold this particular patch of ground says about your fitness as a mate. Her evaluation is thorough and methodical. She's not just choosing a partner, she's choosing the father of her offspring, and that decision will determine whether her genes survive to the next generation. You adjust your approach, trying different calling patterns, different postures, different ways of presenting yourself. Some techniques get her attention, others are met with complete indifference. It's a learning process that happens in real time, with stakes that couldn't be higher. Other males are calling from nearby territories, and you can see her listening, comparing, weighing her options. You're not her only choice, and she's making that abundantly clear. The competition intensifies when another male decides to challenge your territorial boundaries while the female is present. He's slightly smaller than you, but he's bold and aggressive, clearly hoping to impress her by displacing you from your own territory. The timing is terrible from your perspective. Fighting will distract from your courtship efforts and might even drive the female away. But you can't ignore a direct challenge without losing face and territory both. The fight is brutal and quick. Your rival launches himself at you with desperate energy, knowing this might be his only chance to claim quality territory before the breeding season ends. You meet his attack head on, your powerful hind legs driving you forward like a battering ram. You slam together with a sound that echoes across the landscape, mandibles clicking as you grapple for advantage. The female stops feeding and watches with apparent interest, though whether she's evaluating your fighting ability or just waiting to see who wins is unclear. Your opponent is fierce, but inexperienced. He commits too fully to his attacks, leaving himself vulnerable to counterattacks that a more seasoned fighter would avoid. You capitalize on one of these openings, managing to flip him onto his back and pin him there with your full weight. For a moment, he struggles beneath you, legs kicking frantically, but then he goes still. He's not injured, just acknowledging defeat. You release him, and he hops away quickly, disappearing into the grass without looking back. When you turn back to the female, she's moved closer. The fight seems to have impressed her, or at least convinced her, that you're capable of defending territory worth claiming. She begins responding to your calls with soft chirps of her own, the first positive feedback you've received. The sound sends electricity through your nervous system. This is actually happening. The courtship ritual that follows is complex and delicate. Every movement, every sound, every gesture carries meaning. You approach her slowly, giving her plenty of opportunity to reject your advances if she chooses. She doesn't flee, but she doesn't make it easy either. She tests you with false starts and sudden movements, gauging your reactions and your ability to read her signals. One wrong move could end everything, sending her flying away to evaluate other males. You've never done this before, but somehow you know what to do. Instincts, millions of years in the making, guide your movements, your calls, your responses to her behavior. You stroke her antennae gently with your own, a gesture that seems to reassure her. You position yourself alongside her, matching her movements, synchronizing your breathing with hers. The world around you fades away until there's nothing but this moment, this interaction, this chance to fulfill your biological purpose. The actual mating is surprisingly brief. After all the territorial disputes, the courtship displays, the careful negotiations, the physical act itself is over in seconds. But those seconds represent the culmination of everything you've worked toward since the moment you hatched from your egg. You've successfully passed your genes to the next generation. Your life's primary mission is complete. The female doesn't linger afterward. She has other priorities now, finding suitable places to lay her eggs, gathering the resources she'll need for the energy intensive process of reproduction. She flies away without ceremony, leaving you alone in your territory once again. You might never see her again, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that somewhere in the near future, your offspring will crack through their own egg cases and begin their own journeys through life. 6. But your story isn't over yet. The breeding season continues, and other females visit your territory over the following weeks. Some are receptive to your advances, others reject them outright. Each encounter is different, requiring you to adapt your approach, refine your technique, learn from both successes and failures. You mate several more times, though never again with quite the same intensity as that first experience. Each success increases the chances that your genetic legacy will survive into the next generation. The constant activity takes a toll on your body. Fighting off rivals, performing elaborate courtship displays, and maintaining your territory through the peak breeding season drains your energy reserves faster than you can replenish them. You're eating constantly, but it's barely enough to keep up with the demands you're placing on your system. You can feel yourself getting weaker, though whether from exhaustion or something more fundamental is unclear. Your calls become less frequent, less powerful. Your territorial responses become slower, less aggressive. Other males begin testing your boundaries more frequently, sensing weakness they didn't detect before. You win some of these encounters and lose others, gradually ceding portions of your territory to younger, stronger rivals. It's a humbling process, but also a natural one. The same hierarchy that elevated you above smaller males is now working against you as your own capabilities decline. The days grow shorter and cooler, signaling the approaching end of the breeding season. The frantic activity of the past months begins to wind down. Fewer females are seeking mates. Fewer males are establishing new territories. The constant chorus of calling that defined the summer starts to fade as individuals focus more on survival than reproduction. You sense the change in the air, the subtle shift from abundance to scarcity that means winter is coming. Your appetite changes too. Where you once ate primarily for energy and immediate needs, now you find yourself consuming different types of plants, seeking out nutrients your body seems to crave. Your feeding becomes less frequent, but more focused, as if you're preparing for some future challenge you can sense but don't fully understand. Other grasshoppers around you are showing similar change in behavior, becoming less social, less territorial, more focused on individual survival. The first frost arrives without warning on a clear night in late autumn. You wake up sluggish and disoriented, your body struggling to function in the cold. Around you, the landscape has transformed overnight. Plants that were green and vibrant yesterday are now blackened and wilted. The abundant food sources that sustained you through the summer and fall have largely disappeared. You try to fly, but your wings feel heavy and unresponsive. Even walking requires more effort than it should. You're not alone in your struggles. Grasshoppers everywhere are moving more slowly, eating less, becoming increasingly vulnerable to predators that are better adapted to cold weather. Some of your neighbors have already died, their bodies stiff and motionless in the frost-covered grass. Others are clearly dying, their movements erratic and weak. The vibrant community of the breeding season has become a collection of isolated individuals, each fighting their own battle against the inevitable. You find shelter under a large rock, seeking protection from the wind and whatever warmth the stone might retain from yesterday's sun. The space is cramped and uncomfortable, but it's the best option available. You're not the only one with this idea. Several other grasshoppers have crowded into the same refuge, though none of you have the energy for the territorial disputes that would have erupted months ago. Competition has given way to a kind of grim solidarity. Food becomes increasingly scarce as the cold persists. The plants that survived the first frost are dying in subsequent freezes, leaving little for you to eat. You venture out during the warmest parts of the day, searching desperately for anything edible, but finding almost nothing. Your body begins consuming its own tissues for energy, a process that weakens you further while buying only temporary relief from the constant hunger. Your movements become increasingly labored. Flights that were effortless months ago now require tremendous effort and leave you exhausted. Even short hops become challenging as your muscles lose strength and coordination. You spend more and more time in your shelter, conserving what little energy remains, emerging only when absolutely necessary to search for food that probably isn't there. The other grasshoppers in your refuge are deteriorating at similar rates. Some stop moving altogether, their bodies becoming still and cold. Others continue struggling for a few more days before they too succumb to the combination of cold, hunger, and exhaustion. You watch them die one by one, knowing that your own fate is sealed. The cold that preserved your eggs through last winter will not extend the same mercy to your adult body. Your last clear memory is of a sunny afternoon when the temperature rose just enough to give you hope. You managed to find a few seeds that had fallen from a dead plant, and for a brief moment, you felt almost like your old self. You even attempted a short flight, lifting yourself a few inches off the ground before settling back down, too weak to sustain the effort. It was a reminder of what you once were, a ghost of the powerful creature you'd been just months before. But that afternoon was an anomaly. The cold returned with renewed intensity, and you never fully recovered from it. Your movements became slower, your periods of activity shorter, your grip on consciousness increasingly tenuous. You retreated to your shelter one final time, settling into the familiar cramped space, feeling the stone's cold surface against your body. The end comes quietly, without drama or struggle. You simply stop moving, stop breathing, stop being. Your body joins the others that have accumulated in and around the shelter, adding to the collection of former lives that winter claims every year. There's no pain, no final moment of clarity, no sense of completion or loss. You just fade away as countless grasshoppers have done before you, and countless more will do after. But your story continues in ways you'll never know. Buried in the soil throughout your former territory, dozens of egg cases wait for spring's return. Inside those protective shells, your offspring are already developing, following the same patterns that guided your own embryonic growth months before. They carry your genes, your potential, your chance at immortality through reproduction. When the warm weather returns, they'll hatch just as you did, tiny and vulnerable, but alive with possibility. They'll face the same challenges you faced, make the same discoveries, fight the same battles. Some will succeed where you succeeded, others will fail where you thrived, but they'll all carry forward the genetic legacy that you and your mates created during those intense breeding season months. The cycle that began with your emergence from an egg case will repeat itself with mathematical precision. Your children will grow, molt, develop wings, claim territories, fight rivals, attract mates, and eventually succumb to winter, just as you did. Their children will do the same, and their children after them, in an endless succession of lives that stretches back millions of years and will continue long after your immediate lineage has been forgotten. This is the true measure of success in your world, not individual survival, but genetic continuation. not personal achievement, but species persistence. You lived fast, reproduced successfully, and died when your time was up, fulfilling your role in the vast biological system that encompasses all grasshoppers, all insects, all life on Earth. Your individual story has ended, but the larger story of which you were a part continues without pause, indifferent to the fate of any single participant, but dependent on the collective success of all. In the spring that follows your death, the world awakens with familiar rhythms. The soil warms, moisture seeps through layers of earth, and deep beneath the surface, your legacy stirs. Inside the egg cases you helped create, tiny forms push against their shells with the same determination you once showed. They don't know about you, don't remember the grasshopper who fought for territory and won mating rights in the summer before. They only know the urgent need to break free. Your daughter cracks her shell first among her clutchmates. She's smaller than you were at hatching, but she carries your genetic blueprint for strong hind legs and sharp survival instincts. The world she emerges into looks identical to the one you knew, but it's subtly different. The plants have grown in new patterns, the predator populations have shifted, and the competition includes offspring from grasshoppers who outlasted you by days or weeks in the previous year's breeding season. She faces the same immediate challenges that defined your early life. Hunger drives her toward the nearest vegetation, but a ground spider intercepts her path before she can reach safety. Unlike you, she doesn't freeze when confronted by the predator. Some random combination of your genes and her mother's has produced faster reflexes, better coordination. She leaps sideways with precision you never achieved as a newly hatched nymph, landing safely in a patch of thick grass while the spider searches uselessly for prey that's already gone. This small advantage compounds over the following days. Better initial coordination leads to more successful feeding attempts. More food means faster growth and earlier molting. Earlier molting means reaching adult size, while resources are still abundant and competition is lighter. By the time she completes her final molt and develops wings, she's larger and stronger than you were at the same stage of development. But size and strength don't guarantee success in the complex social dynamics of adult grasshopper life. Your daughter faces challenges you never encountered because the population has grown since your time. More survivors from the previous year's reproduction means more competition for every resource. The territories that seemed adequate in your generation are subdivided and contested by twice as many individuals. She claims a small section of ground near where you once held territory, though she has no way of knowing the connection. The plants are similar, the hiding spots are familiar from a genetic perspective, but everything else has intensified. Males call constantly from every direction, their choruses so dense and overlapping that individual songs become difficult to distinguish. Fights break out daily over boundaries that shift with each victory and defeat. Your daughter adapts by developing a strategy you never used. Instead of defending a large territory against all comers, she claims a smaller area and defends it absolutely. Every challenge is met with immediate, overwhelming aggression. She fights with a fury that surprises larger opponents and often wins through sheer determination rather than superior size. Word spreads quickly through the local population. This particular patch of ground belongs to someone who will not back down under any circumstances. The strategy works until she encounters your son. He hatched from a different clutch in a different area, but carries the same genetic legacy from your mating season. He's larger than she is, having benefited from different environmental conditions during his development, and he's adopted the opposite approach to territorial competition. Instead of fighting for small areas, he ranges widely, challenging multiple opponents and claiming whatever he can hold through mobility and opportunism. Their confrontation is inevitable when his wandering brings him into her territory. She responds to his presence with her usual aggressive display, but he doesn't retreat like the others. He's faced smaller, fiercer opponents before and learned that size eventually trumps intensity in prolonged conflicts. The battle that follows is longer and more brutal than any either has experienced. They lock legs and mandibles, each trying to leverage their advantages. She relies on quick strikes and sudden directional changes, hoping to catch him off balance. He uses his weight and reach, trying to pin her down and end the fight through overwhelming force. Neither strategy proves decisive. They separate, circle each other, and engage again with growing desperation. The fight attracts attention from other grasshoppers, including several females who watch with the calculating interest you remember from your own breeding season. Both combatants are aware of their audience, but neither can afford to back down now. Too much is at stake: territory, mating opportunities, genetic legacy, everything that matters in their world. Your daughter finally gains advantage through a technique that emerges spontaneously from her genetic programming. She feints left, drawing his defensive response, then pivots right and strikes at his hind leg joint with surgical precision. It's not enough to cause real damage, but it disrupts his balance at a crucial moment. She follows up immediately, driving him backward until he stumbles over the uneven ground. He recovers quickly, but the psychological impact is decisive. He's been outmaneuvered by a smaller opponent, and both fighters know it. More importantly, the watching females have seen it too. He disengages from combat and hops away to find easier conquests elsewhere, leaving her in possession of both her original territory and an enhanced reputation. The victory brings immediate benefits. 2 of the observing females approach her territory within hours, drawn by her demonstration of fighting ability and tactical intelligence. Your daughter has inherited your capacity for courtship displays, but she's refined them through observation and practice. Her calls are more complex than yours were, her movements more precisely calibrated to appeal to female sensibilities. The first female rejects her advances after a brief evaluation. She's looking for something different: larger size, different vocalizations, territory with specific plant varieties that this location lacks. But the second female is more receptive. She enters the territory cautiously, sampling the available food sources, testing the shelter options, evaluating everything with the thorough attention you remember from your own mating experiences. Your daughter's courtship succeeds through patience and persistence. She doesn't rush the process or try to overwhelm the female with aggressive displays. Instead, she matches the female's energy level, responding to subtle cues and adjusting her approach based on real-time feedback. When the female finally signals acceptance, the mating occurs with the same brief intensity that characterized your own reproductive encounters. But unlike your experience, this pairing leads to something unexpected. The female doesn't immediately leave after mating. She remains in the territory for several days, continuing to feed and interact with your daughter in ways that suggest ongoing partnership rather than simple reproduction. This extended association provides advantages neither of your parents experienced. Together, they're more effective at defending the territory against intruders. While one feeds, the other maintains surveillance for threats. When predators approach, they coordinate their responses, creating confusion that makes successful attacks much more difficult. Their combined calling efforts produce more complex acoustic displays that attract additional females while discouraging rival males. Your daughter mates with 3 more females over the following weeks, each encounter building on lessons learned from previous experiences. Her success rate is higher than yours was, partly due to inherited traits, but mostly because of the strategic advantages her partnership provides. The extra security allows her to invest more energy in courtship and less in constant vigilance. But success brings its own challenges. Her territory becomes increasingly attractive to other grasshoppers, both male and female. The constant stream of visitors creates opportunities, but also increases competition and resource strain. Food that seemed abundant for one individual becomes inadequate for the larger population her success has attracted. She responds by expanding her territorial claims, challenging neighbors who previously seemed too strong to confront. Her enhanced reputation and partnership advantages give her confidence to attempt conquests that would have been impossible earlier. Some of these campaigns succeed, adding valuable resources to her domain. Others fail costly, leaving her weakened and vulnerable to counterattacks. The most serious threat comes from an unexpected direction. A group of young males, recently molted and desperate for territories, forms a loose alliance to challenge established landholders. They've learned from watching individual confrontations that coordinated attacks can overwhelm even superior opponents. Your daughter becomes their primary target because her success makes her the most visible threat to their expansion plans. The attack comes at dawn when her energy levels are lowest. 3 males approach simultaneously from different directions, timing their assault to prevent coordinated defense. Your daughter and her partner respond as well as possible under the circumstances, but they're outnumbered and caught off guard. The battle is chaotic and desperate, with multiple combats occurring simultaneously across the territory. Your daughter holds her ground against 2 attackers, using the terrain advantages she's learned through months of defending this space. But her partner faces a larger opponent who's fresher and more aggressive than anyone they've encountered before. The third attacker roams freely through the territory, claiming resources and disrupting defensive positions while the main battles continue. The tide turns when your daughter manages to defeat one of her opponents decisively, freeing her to assist her partner. Together, they drive back the larger male, but the damage is already done. The third attacker has claimed a significant portion of their territory and shows no intention of retreating. What began as an absolute defense of their domain has become a negotiated settlement that leaves them with reduced resources and weakened position. The experience teaches your daughter that even successful strategies have limits. Individual excellence and partnership advantages can overcome most challenges, but they're not sufficient against coordinated group action. She adapts by forming her own alliances, reaching out to neighboring females who face similar pressures from roving male coalitions. These new partnerships create a different dynamic than anything you experienced in your generation. Instead of individual territories defended by single grasshoppers or pairs, the area becomes organized around loose confederations of females who coordinate their responses to external threats while maintaining internal competition for resources and mating opportunities. Your daughter becomes a central figure in one of these confederations, her fighting reputation and territorial success making her a natural leader. But leadership brings responsibilities that drain energy from reproduction and personal survival. She spends increasing amounts of time mediating disputes between allies, organizing responses to external threats, and maintaining the complex social relationships that hold the Confederation together. The breeding season reaches its peak during this period of maximum social complexity. Your daughter mates successfully with multiple partners, but the constant demands of leadership mean she can't invest as much individual attention in courtship as she did earlier. Her reproductive success depends increasingly on her reputation and status within the Confederation rather than personal displays and territorial quality. This shift towards social reproduction over individual excellence represents an evolutionary adaptation that your generation never developed. The increased population density and resource competition have created selective pressure for cooperation and group coordination that didn't exist in your time. Your daughter and her peers are pioneering new strategies that may become standard for future generations. But these innovations come with costs that become apparent as the season progresses. The energy demands of maintaining complex social relationships leave less available for basic survival needs. Food requirements increase due to stress and constant activity, but cooperative territories often become overgrazed more quickly than individually held lands. Your daughter begins showing signs of exhaustion earlier than you did in your breeding season. Her calls become less frequent and less complex. Her territorial responses slow down, allowing smaller incursions that she would have repelled immediately in previous weeks. The other members of her confederation notice these changes and begin positioning themselves to take advantage if her condition deteriorates further. The social dynamics that elevated her to leadership now work against her as allies become potential rivals. The same cooperative instincts that allowed the Confederation to form also create internal competition when resources become scarce or key members show weakness. Your daughter finds herself fighting defensive battles against former partners who sense opportunity in her declining condition. These internal conflicts are more psychologically devastating than external challenges because they violate the trust relationships that made cooperation possible in the first place. Your daughter's responses become increasingly erratic as she struggles to distinguish between genuine threats and temporary disputes that could be resolved through negotiation. The Confederation begins to dissolve as autumn approaches and individual survival takes precedence over group cooperation. Your daughter retains control of her core territory, but the extended holdings and alliance benefits disappear as former partners focus on their own preparation for winter. She finds herself essentially alone again, facing the seasonal transition with depleted energy reserves and reduced territorial resources. The first cold snap arrives earlier than it did in your year, catching many grasshoppers unprepared for the sudden temperature drop. Your daughter survives the initial frost, but her weakened condition makes recovery more difficult than it should be. She moves slowly in the morning chill, struggles to find adequate food among the dying vegetation, and spends increasing amounts of time in sheltered locations that offer protection but limit foraging opportunities. Her decline accelerates through a series of small setbacks that would have been manageable in better condition. A minor injury during a territorial dispute becomes infected and doesn't heal properly. A day of heavy rain forces her to shelter without food, while her energy reserves dwindle further. A near miss with a predator leaves her shaken and hyper-cautious, reducing her already limited mobility. Unlike your death, which came gradually through general decline, your daughter faces a more specific crisis. Her infected injury worsens despite her body's attempts at healing, creating systemic problems that affect her coordination and decision-making abilities. She becomes increasingly disoriented, sometimes attempting to fly when she's too weak to sustain flight, other times remaining motionless when activity might help her condition. The end comes during a particularly cold night when her body finally exhausts its ability to maintain basic functions. She settles into a sheltered depression beneath a fallen log, the same type of location where you spent your final hours, and simply stops responding to external stimuli. Her body joins the seasonal accumulation of grasshopper remains that mark the transition from abundance to scarcity. But like you, she leaves behind genetic legacy in the form of fertilized eggs buried throughout the territories she controlled during the breeding season. Her offspring will hatch into a world shaped by the social innovations she and her generation pioneered, carrying forward both her individual genetic traits and the cultural adaptations that emerged from increased population density and resource competition. The cycle continues with mathematical precision, but each generation faces subtly different challenges that require new solutions built on inherited foundations. Your daughter's children will grow up in a world where cooperation is more important than it was in your time, where individual excellence must be balanced against group dynamics, where success increasingly depends on social intelligence as much as physical capability. These changes don't represent progress in any meaningful sense, just adaptation to shifting environmental pressures. Your generation's solutions were optimal for your circumstances. Your daughter's generation developed different solutions for different circumstances. Neither approach is inherently superior, but both represent successful responses to the fundamental challenge of survival and reproduction in a competitive world. The grasshopper species as a whole benefits from this generational experimentation with different strategies. Some approaches prove more successful than others in specific conditions, but the overall genetic diversity ensures that the population can adapt to whatever challenges emerge in future seasons. Individual grasshoppers live and die, but the species persists through constant adaptation and change. Your personal contribution to this process ended with your death, but your genetic influence continues through your offspring and their descendants. The traits that made you successful, quick reflexes, territorial aggression, effective courtship displays, remain in the gene pool, available to be expressed in new combinations and contexts as conditions warrant. This is the ultimate meaning of your existence, not personal achievement or individual recognition, but participation in the ongoing biological experiment that is life on Earth. You played your role, contributed your genetic resources, and made way for the next generation to face their own challenges with tools partially inherited from your experience. The grasshopper population explodes in the years following your daughter's death. Her social innovations spread through the surviving bloodlines, creating new behavioral patterns that reshape how entire communities interact. But success brings unexpected consequences that no individual grasshopper could have anticipated. Territory becomes increasingly fragmented as more grasshoppers adopt cooperative strategies. What used to be clear boundaries between individual holdings transforms into a complex mosaic of overlapping claims, shared resources, and temporary alliances. Your grandson emerges into this transformed landscape, carrying genetic traits from both sides of your lineage, but facing challenges that would have been unimaginable in your time. He's smaller than you were, a consequence of increased competition during his development, but he compensates with enhanced agility and more sophisticated social instincts. Where you relied primarily on individual strength and territorial aggression, he navigates complex relationship networks from his first days as an adult. His survival depends less on fighting ability and more on reading social cues, forming beneficial partnerships and avoiding conflicts he can't win. The calling patterns have evolved too. Individual songs have given way to coordinated choruses that require precise timing and harmonization with multiple partners. Your grandson spends weeks learning these complex acoustic displays, practicing with other young males until they can produce the synchronized sounds that females now expect from potential mates. It's a skill you never needed to develop, but it's essential for reproductive success in his generation. Food sources face unprecedented pressure from the enlarged population. Plants that sustained your generation for entire seasons now support grasshoppers for weeks at most before being completely consumed. Your grandson learns to forage in coordinated groups that can strip an area clean in hours, then move on to new locations before competitors arrive. The strategy is efficient but unsustainable, creating boom-bust cycles that leave entire regions temporarily barren. Competition extends beyond just other grasshoppers. The increased population density attracts more predators, creating hunting pressure that your generation rarely experienced. Birds learn to follow grasshopper swarms, picking off individuals during the chaotic feeding frenzies. Spiders position themselves along known migration routes, building webs across paths that thousands of grasshoppers will traverse in their search for food. Your grandson develops survival techniques that blend inherited reflexes with learned behaviors specific to high-density environments. He travels in the center of groups whenever possible, using other grasshoppers as shields against aerial attacks. He memorizes the locations of spider webs and shares this information with traveling companions, creating informal networks of safety intelligence that no individual could maintain alone. But the most significant change is in reproductive strategy, where your generation mated with multiple partners sequentially over an extended breeding season. Your grandson's peers engage in more complex reproductive negotiations that involve long-term commitments and resource-sharing agreements. Females no longer evaluate males purely on individual merit. They assess entire partnership networks and alliance structures. Your grandson initially struggles with these new dynamics. His inherited traits favor individual displays of strength and territory quality. But females in his generation respond more positively to males who demonstrate social integration and cooperative ability. He watches more socially adept rivals succeed where his traditional approaches fail, forcing him to adapt strategies that feel unnatural given his genetic programming. The learning process is painful and often humiliating. His first attempts at cooperative courtship result in embarrassing failures when he misreads social cues or fails to coordinate properly with potential partners. Females reject him not because he lacks individual quality, but because he doesn't fit smoothly into the complex social structures they're seeking to join. He eventually succeeds by forming an unlikely partnership with another socially awkward male who faces similar challenges. Together, they create a small cooperative territory that attracts females who prefer simpler social arrangements to the Byzantine alliances dominating the area. Their success is modest compared to the leaders of major coalitions, but it's sufficient for reproductive purposes. The partnership teaches your grandson valuable lessons about balancing individual needs with group requirements. He learns to share resources equitably, coordinate defensive responses, and present a united front during territorial disputes. These skills prove transferable to larger social contexts, gradually improving his standing within the broader community. His mating success increases as females recognize his growing social competence. He forms relationships with partners who value stability and predictability over the exciting but risky dynamics of larger alliances. These matings produce offspring who inherit both his individual capabilities and his learned social adaptations, creating a hybrid approach that may prove advantageous in future generations. But even as your grandson adapts to the new social environment, forces beyond grasshopper control are reshaping the landscape in fundamental ways. Human agricultural practices intensify in the region, reducing habitat diversity and creating monoculture environments that can't support the complex ecosystems grasshoppers require. Pesticide applications eliminate food sources and create toxic zones that force population movements into increasingly crowded safe areas. Climate patterns shift in ways that disrupt traditional breeding cycles. Temperatures rise earlier and stay elevated longer, accelerating development, but also increasing metabolic demands that strained food sources can't meet. Rainfall becomes more erratic, creating drought conditions that stress vegetation and flood events that destroy carefully constructed territories. Your grandson's generation faces the challenge of adapting to environmental changes that occur faster than evolutionary processes can respond. The social innovations that help them cope with population pressure become liabilities when habitat destruction forces rapid migrations to unfamiliar territories. Cooperative strategies that worked in stable environments prove inadequate when resources become unpredictably scarce. The population begins a decline that mirrors its previous growth, but in reverse. Reproductive success drops as stressed adults produce fewer viable eggs. Mortality increases among juveniles who can't find adequate nutrition in degraded habitats. The complex social structures that defined your grandson's early adult life begin dissolving as groups fragment under environmental pressure. Your grandson survives longer than many of his peers because his hybrid approach, combining individual resilience with selective cooperation, proves more adaptable to changing conditions than either purely individual or purely social strategies. He abandons his cooperative territory when it becomes unsustainable, reverting to the solitary approach that characterized your generation, but applying social skills learned during his partnership phase. The regression isn't complete, however. He retains communication abilities and social awareness that allow him to form temporary alliances when beneficial while avoiding the long-term commitments that become burdens during resource scarcity. This flexibility helps him navigate the increasingly unpredictable environment, though it comes at the cost of the reproductive success he achieved during more stable times. As environmental conditions continue deteriorating, your grandson faces choices that previous generations never encountered. Traditional wintering strategies become impossible when usual shelter sites are destroyed or contaminated. Migration routes that supported grasshopper movement for centuries become blocked by human development or rendered unusable by habitat modification. He joins a desperate migration toward rumored habitat reserves and distant mountains, traveling with a mixed group of survivors from various collapsed territories. The journey is longer and more dangerous than any grasshopper migration in recorded history, crossing landscapes transformed by human activity and climate change into alien environments that offer few resources and many hazards. Most of the migrants die along the way. Predators exploit their vulnerability during river crossings and open ground traverses. Exhaustion claims others who can't maintain the pace required to reach resources before they're depleted by earlier arrivals. Disease spreads through the stressed population, killing grasshoppers whose immune systems are compromised by malnutrition and constant travel. Your grandson survives through a combination of inherited physical resilience, learned social skills that help him identify trustworthy travel companions, and simple luck in avoiding the worst hazards. He reaches the mountain habitat in poor condition but alive, joining a remnant population of survivors from multiple regions who face the challenge of rebuilding Grasshopper society from scattered fragments. The mountain environment offers refuge, but requires adaptations that challenge fundamental aspects of grasshopper biology. The altitude affects flight performance and temperature regulation. The terrain is steeper and more complex than the grasslands where the species evolved. Food sources are different in both composition and availability patterns, requiring new foraging strategies and dietary adjustments. Your grandson spends his final breeding season helping establish new territorial patterns adapted to mountain conditions. The process involves trial and error as survivors experiment with different approaches to resource distribution and social organization. Some attempts fail catastrophically, leading to conflicts that further reduce the already depleted population. Others succeed partially, creating sustainable but limited communities. His reproductive success in this final environment is minimal. The stress of migration and adaptation has reduced his fertility, while the scarcity of suitable females limits mating opportunities. He manages one successful pairing with a female who survived the journey from a distant region, their mating representing a genetic mixing that might help future generations adapt to changing conditions. The eggs from this final mating are deposited in mountain soil that's never supported grasshopper reproduction before. Whether they'll survive the winter and develop successfully in spring remains uncertain. The environmental conditions are marginal for the species, but they represent the best available option given the degradation of traditional habitats. Your grandson's death comes not from the seasonal cold that claimed you and your daughter, but from accumulated damage caused by environmental toxins encountered during migration. His body systems, stressed by months of exposure to contaminated food and water sources, finally fail during what should have been a manageable temperature drop. He dies knowing that his offspring face an uncertain future in a world that has changed beyond recognition. The mountain refuge survives for several more generations, producing grasshoppers who are increasingly adapted to high-altitude conditions, but increasingly different from their lowland ancestors. These evolutionary changes happen rapidly under intense selective pressure, creating new traits and behaviors while losing others that are no longer advantageous. Your great-granddaughter emerges from eggs laid in rocky mountain soil, her body slightly modified from ancestral patterns. Her legs are shorter and more powerful, better suited for navigating steep terrain than for long-distance hopping across flat grasslands. Her wings are broader and more robust, designed to handle unpredictable mountain air currents that would have grounded lowland grasshoppers. Her social instincts reflect the hybrid strategies developed by previous generations, but they're applied to a community that's fundamentally different from anything in grasshopper evolutionary history. The population is too small to support the complex alliance structures that characterized your grandson's youth, but it's also too cooperative to return to the purely individual territoriality of your era. She grows up in a world where every individual is known personally by every other individual, where reproductive decisions are influenced by genetic diversity, concerns that would have been irrelevant in larger populations, where survival depends on maintaining group cohesion while avoiding the inbreeding that threatens small, isolated communities. Her mating choices are limited by population size, but guided by instincts that favor genetic diversity over individual quality. She pairs with males whose bloodlines are most different from her own, prioritizing the long-term survival of the population over immediate reproductive advantages. These decisions require social intelligence that exceeds anything previous generations needed to develop. The mountain community faces constant pressure from environmental changes that continue accelerating. Weather patterns become increasingly erratic, creating seasons that don't match the timing of grasshopper life cycles. Food plants evolve in response to changing conditions, sometimes becoming unsuitable for grasshopper consumption within a single generation. Your great granddaughter becomes part of a population that's essentially living through a real time evolutionary experiment. Every generation faces new challenges that require rapid adaptation or extinction. Some traits that were advantageous in her parents' time become liabilities in hers. Others that seemed neutral or even harmful prove crucial for survival under new conditions. The reproductive strategies continue evolving as the population size fluctuates with environmental conditions. During favorable years when resources are abundant, grasshoppers can afford to be selective about mating partners and invest heavily in territorial competition. During harsh years when survival is uncertain, reproductive urgency overrides individual preferences and social structures. Your great granddaughter experiences both extremes during her adult life. She successfully claims and defends territory during a particularly good season, mating multiple times with high quality partners and producing numerous offspring. But she also endures a catastrophic year when volcanic activity disrupts regional weather patterns, creating conditions that kill most of the population and force survivors into desperate reproductive strategies. Her genetic legacy reflects this environmental variability. Some of her offspring inherit traits optimized for stable conditions and competitive success, while others carry genes that enhance survival during environmental crises. This diversification strategy helps ensure that some portion of her bloodline will survive whatever challenges future generations encounter. The mountain population persists for several more decades, gradually adapting to local conditions while maintaining enough genetic diversity to avoid inbreeding depression. But the refuge is ultimately temporary. Continued environmental degradation eventually reaches even these remote highlands, creating conditions that exceed the species' adaptive capacity. Your great granddaughter's final descendant dies during a winter that's both colder and longer than any in recorded history, the result of atmospheric changes that disrupt global weather patterns. The mountain grasshopper population joins the growing list of local extinctions that mark the species' retreat from environments that can no longer support their survival. But grasshoppers persist in other refuges scattered across continents, each population adapting to local conditions while maintaining the essential characteristics that define the species. Your genetic contribution remains part of this distributed survival strategy, carried forward by descendants whose lives bear little resemblance to your own, but who face the same fundamental challenges of survival and reproduction that have driven evolution for millions of years. The story that began with your emergence from an egg case continues in forms you could never have imagined, shaped by environmental pressures that exceed anything in evolutionary history, but guided by genetic programs that encode solutions developed through countless generations of trial and error. Your individual life was brief and local, but your participation in the ongoing experiment of life ensures that some portion of your genetic legacy will persist as long as grasshoppers exist anywhere on Earth. This persistence through change represents the ultimate success for any organism, not individual immortality, which is impossible, but genetic continuity across time and space that allows species to adapt to whatever challenges they encounter. Your contribution to this process was small but essential, part of the vast collaborative effort that is evolution itself. The grasshoppers that survive in scattered refuges worldwide carry genetic information that traces back through your lineage and millions of others, creating a shared heritage that connects all members of the species despite their geographic separation and environmental adaptations. This unity within diversity ensures that grasshoppers will continue to exist in some form as long as Earth can support life, adapting and changing, but maintaining the essential characteristics that define their identity. Your life as a grasshopper ended decades ago, but your story continues in every grasshopper that survives, reproduces, and passes genetic information to the next generation. The specific traits you contributed may be diluted through mixing with other bloodlines, but they remain part of the species' total genetic resources, available to be expressed when conditions favor their utility. This is the true measure of biological success, not individual achievement or personal recognition, but contribution to the ongoing survival and adaptation of the species as a whole. You played your role in this vast collaborative effort, adding your genetic resources to the common pool and helping ensure that grasshoppers would persist through whatever challenges the future might bring. The cycle that began with your birth continues with mathematical precision, but each generation faces new versions of the eternal challenges that define life on Earth. Your descendants solve these challenges using tools that combine inherited wisdom with innovative adaptations, creating new possibilities while maintaining connection to the ancestral patterns that have guided grasshopper existence for millions of years. The endless repetition feels almost cosmic in its scope, but it's also brutally practical. Each cycle refines the formula slightly, testing new combinations of traits against environmental challenges that shift like weather patterns. Your genetic signature becomes part of a vast library of solutions, cataloged not in books or databases, but in the living bodies of grasshoppers scattered across continents. Some of your descendants develop in urban environments where concrete replaces soil and artificial lights confuse natural rhythms. They learn to time their life cycles to street lamp schedules instead of sunrise and sunset. Their eggs survive in flower boxes and highway medians, places that would have been unimaginable habitat during your lifetime. The skills they need, navigating traffic patterns, avoiding pesticide applications, finding food among ornamental plants, would be foreign to you, but they solve these problems using modified versions of the same instincts that guided your survival. Others adapt to agricultural landscapes where monoculture crops create feast or famine conditions. These grasshoppers develop boom-bust population cycles that mirror the planting and harvesting schedules of human farmers. They become specialists in rapid reproduction during brief windows of opportunity, cramming entire life cycles into narrow time frames when conditions are optimal. The most successful populations learn to exploit human activity instead of simply avoiding it. They position themselves near irrigation systems that create reliable moisture, follow farm equipment that disturbs soil and exposes food sources, and time their reproduction to coincide with crop planting when fresh vegetation is most abundant. It's a dangerous strategy because humans actively fight against grasshopper populations that threaten their crops, but the rewards can be enormous for those who master the timing. Your genetic legacy appears in all these diverse adaptations, though in forms so modified by local selection pressures that the connection would be unrecognizable. A grasshopper in downtown Chicago carries some of your traits, but they're expressed through behaviors adapted to urban survival. A grasshopper in rural Kansas might share your territorial instincts, but applies them to defending sections of wheat fields instead of natural grasslands. The communication systems continue evolving too. In environments where background noise from human activity makes traditional calling ineffective, grasshoppers develop new signaling methods. Some rely more heavily on visual displays, creating elaborate movements that can be seen across greater distances. Others shift to different acoustic frequencies that cut through traffic noise and machinery sounds. Chemical communication becomes more important in polluted environments where airborne scents travel differently than they did in clean air. Grasshoppers learn to interpret pheromone signals that have been modified by interaction with industrial compounds, creating new chemical vocabularies that allow them to communicate effectively despite contamination. These innovations spread through populations with surprising speed. A successful adaptation developed in one region can migrate to distant areas within a few generations, carried by individuals who survive long enough to reproduce in new territories. The genetic mixing that results from these movements creates hybrid populations that combine traits from multiple lineages, including yours. But innovation comes with costs that become apparent over longer time frames. Adaptations that provide short-term advantages sometimes create vulnerabilities that only emerge when conditions change again. Populations that specialize too heavily in exploiting specific human activities become dependent on maintaining those relationships, making them vulnerable to sudden policy changes or economic shifts that alter land use patterns. The urban grasshoppers face this challenge when cities implement new landscaping policies that eliminate the ornamental plants they've learned to depend on. The agricultural specialists struggle when farmers switch to different crops or adopt new pest control methods. The populations that seemed most successful suddenly find themselves over-specialized for conditions that no longer exist. This boom-bust pattern plays out repeatedly across different regions and time frames. Populations explode when they discover new opportunities, crash when those opportunities disappear, then slowly rebuild using survivors who carry genetic information from the original expansion. Your contribution to this process appears in the recovery phases, when genetic diversity becomes crucial for adapting to changed circumstances. The recovery populations often look quite different from their ancestors. They're smaller, more cautious, less specialized in exploiting any single opportunity. They maintain broader dietary ranges and more flexible behavioral patterns that allow them to survive when specific resources become unavailable. These traits echo strategies that served you well during your own life, though they're expressed in contexts you never experienced. Climate change accelerates all these processes, creating environmental shifts that happen faster than evolutionary responses can typically accommodate. Temperature ranges that grasshoppers evolved to handle over millions of years now fluctuate within single decades. Precipitation patterns that remained stable for centuries become unpredictable within individual lifetimes. Your descendants face winters that are too warm for proper egg development, summers that are too hot for adult activity, and growing seasons that don't match the timing of food plant availability. The genetic flexibility that your reproduction contributed becomes essential for survival, as populations must adapt continuously rather than finding stable niches and maintaining them over long periods. Some populations respond by becoming more mobile, developing stronger flight capabilities that allow them to track suitable conditions across larger geographic ranges. Others become more dormancy capable, extending egg development periods to better match unpredictable environmental timing. Still others develop broader temperature tolerances that allow them to remain active during conditions that would have been lethal to previous generations. The most successful adaptations often combine multiple strategies. Populations develop enhanced mobility for escaping unsuitable conditions, improved dormancy capabilities for surviving extended unfavorable periods, and broader tolerance ranges for maintaining activity when they can't escape or wait out problems. These complex adaptation packages require genetic contributions from multiple lineages, including the traits you added to the species' total resources. But even the most successful adaptations have limits. Environmental changes that exceed the species' total adaptive capacity create extinction events that eliminate entire regional populations. The grasshoppers that disappear take their genetic contributions with them, reducing the total diversity available for future adaptation attempts. Your genetic legacy survives these bottlenecks because it was distributed across multiple populations before the crisis events occurred. Traits that originated with your reproduction appear in survivors from different regions who never interacted with your direct descendants, but inherited your characteristics through the complex mixing processes that connect all members of the species over time. The post-bottleneck populations that rebuild from these survivors are genetically impoverished compared to their ancestors, but they carry forward the most essential adaptive capabilities, including contributions from your lineage. They face the challenge of rebuilding population numbers while maintaining enough genetic diversity to handle future environmental changes. This rebuilding process creates opportunities for rapid evolution as small populations adapt quickly to local conditions without being constrained by gene flow from larger, more conservative populations. Your genetic contributions can have disproportionate influence during these recovery phases if they happen to provide advantages under the new conditions. Some of these founder populations develop remarkable specializations that would have been impossible in larger, more diverse populations. They adapt to extreme environments that were previously uninhabitable, developing traits that push the boundaries of what's possible for grasshopper physiology and behavior. High-altitude populations develop enhanced oxygen processing capabilities that allow them to remain active at elevations that would incapacitate lowland grasshoppers. Desert populations evolve water conservation mechanisms that rival those of the most drought-adapted species. Arctic populations develop cold tolerance that extends their active season into temperature ranges that were previously lethal. Your genetic signature appears in all these extreme adaptations, though often in highly modified forms. The territorial instincts you expressed through defending patches of temperate grassland become the foundation for defending scarce water sources in desert environments. The mating displays you used to attract partners in moderate climates are modified to function in the brief breeding seasons of Arctic environments. The communication abilities that served you in relatively quiet natural soundscapes evolved to function in the extreme acoustic environments of mountain peaks where wind noise makes traditional calling impossible, or urban canyons where sound reflection creates complex echo patterns that confuse normal directional hearing. These extreme populations often become isolated from mainstream grasshopper evolution, developing in directions that make them increasingly different from their ancestral forms. Over many generations, they might become so specialized that they can no longer interbreed with populations from other regions, effectively becoming new species that trace their origins back to survivors carrying your genetic contributions. The speciation process happens gradually and isn't always obvious even to the grasshoppers involved. Populations that are separated by geographic barriers slowly accumulate genetic changes that reduce their compatibility with other populations. By the time contact is reestablished, they may have diverged enough that hybrid offspring are less viable than purebred individuals from either population. Your genetic legacy becomes part of multiple emerging species, each adapted to specific environmental conditions, but sharing common ancestry that includes your contributions. The traits you expressed during your lifetime appear in modified forms across these diverging lineages, creating a family tree of related species that spans diverse habitats and environmental niches. This radiation of new species represents the ultimate success for your genetic contributions. Instead of simply maintaining one species under changing conditions, your participation in grasshopper reproduction helped generate the diversity that allows multiple species to exploit different opportunities as they become available. The process continues indefinitely as environmental changes create new opportunities for specialization, and geographic separation allows populations to diverge in different directions. Your genetic signature becomes increasingly dispersed across this expanding family of related species, but it remains detectable through the traits and capabilities that connect all these divergent forms to their common ancestry. The mathematical precision of genetic inheritance ensures that some portion of your contribution persists in every descendant population, regardless of how extensively they've modified the specific expression of inherited traits. The algorithms that govern reproduction and development carry forward information from your participation in the breeding cycles of your generation, mixing it with contributions from countless other individuals to create new combinations that face whatever challenges the future presents. This persistence through change and diversification represents the deepest level of biological success. Your individual existence was brief and geographically limited, but your genetic participation in the species' reproductive processes helped create possibilities that extend far beyond what any single grasshopper could achieve through individual effort. The story that began with your emergence from an egg case becomes part of an expanding narrative that includes every grasshopper species that evolves from your ancestral lineage. Each new species faces unique challenges and develops unique solutions, but they all carry forward genetic information that traces back through your reproduction and that of countless other individuals who contributed to the species' total adaptive resources. Your life as a grasshopper ended when winter claimed your individual body, but your participation in the ongoing experiment of evolution continues through every descendant population that survives, adapts, and reproduces in environments you never could have imagined. The traits you expressed during your brief existence remain active in the gene pools of species that may eventually colonize other planets, adapt to climate conditions that don't yet exist, or develop capabilities that transcend current understanding of what's possible for grasshopper biology. This continuity across time and space represents the true significance of your existence. You were never just an individual grasshopper living and dying in a specific place and time. You were a participant in the vast collaborative project that is life itself, contributing your genetic resources to experiments in survival and adaptation that continue as long as any form of life persists anywhere in the universe. The cycle that began with your birth from an egg case continues with unbreakable mathematical precision, but each iteration explores new possibilities and creates new opportunities for the genetic information you contributed to find expression in forms that push the boundaries of what life can achieve. Your story as an individual grasshopper ended decades ago, but your participation in the story of life continues indefinitely, shaping possibilities you could never have imagined through contribution to processes larger than any individual existence. The grasshopper species that carry your genetic legacy face challenges that dwarf anything you encountered during your brief existence. Environmental changes that once took millennia to unfold now happen within decades, creating selection pressures that push evolutionary processes to their absolute limits. Your descendants must adapt not just to new conditions, but to the rate of change itself becoming a primary survival challenge. In the Amazon basin, populations carrying your bloodline develop extended diapause capabilities that allow them to remain dormant for multiple years when conditions become unsuitable. These grasshoppers can essentially pause their life cycles, waiting in egg form through environmental catastrophes that would eliminate populations committed to annual breeding cycles. The ability traces back to genetic flexibility you contributed, though it's expressed in ways that would seem like magic compared to your own simple winter survival. Your genetic signature appears in desert populations that have learned to time their entire life cycles around increasingly unpredictable rainfall patterns. Instead of following calendar seasons, they respond to chemical cues released by vegetation when moisture levels reach optimal thresholds. A population can remain dormant for 3 years, then explode into activity within hours of detecting the right environmental signals. They compress reproduction, growth, and dispersal into frantic bursts that might last only weeks before returning to dormancy. Arctic populations carrying your traits face the opposite challenge. Global warming eliminates the stable cold periods their ancestors required for proper development, forcing them to adapt to environments that shift between temperate and Arctic conditions within single seasons. They develop bifurcated development patterns, producing some offspring adapted for warm conditions and others specialized for cold survival, hedging their genetic bets across multiple environmental possibilities. The urban populations become increasingly sophisticated in their relationship with human technology. Grasshoppers in Tokyo learn to exploit the heat signatures of subway systems, using underground warmth to extend their active seasons beyond what surface conditions would allow. They navigate by memorizing patterns of artificial light, treating LED arrays like constellations that guide their movements through concrete landscapes. Some city populations develop remarkable abilities to process human-created chemicals. They metabolize pesticides that would kill their rural cousins, turning environmental toxins into energy sources through biochemical pathways that didn't exist in your generation. These adaptations come at costs: reduced fertility, shorter lifespans, increased cancer rates, but they allow survival in environments that are completely hostile to unmodified grasshopper physiology. The agricultural populations face arms races with human pest control efforts that accelerate their evolution in unexpected directions. Farmers deploy increasingly sophisticated monitoring systems, creating selection pressure for grasshoppers that can avoid detection by infrared sensors, chemical sniffers, and acoustic monitoring equipment. Your descendants develop behaviors that would seem paranoid compared to your straightforward approach to survival. They learn to move in patterns that confuse motion detection algorithms, staying motionless when surveillance systems are active and moving only during precisely timed windows when monitoring equipment cycles to different areas. Some populations develop the ability to detect electromagnetic fields generated by electronic devices, giving them advance warning of human monitoring efforts. The most successful agricultural populations master the art of synchronized emergence, timing their appearance to overwhelm human response capabilities. Instead of gradual population growth over extended periods, they remain hidden until reaching critical mass, then emerge simultaneously across vast areas. The strategy works because human control efforts are designed to handle normal population densities, not sudden explosions that exceed management capacity. These synchronized populations require communication capabilities that far exceed anything your generation possessed. They coordinate emergence timing across distances of hundreds of kilometers using chemical signals, acoustic patterns, and possibly electromagnetic cues that scientists are still trying to understand. The communication networks rival those of social insects, though they maintain the individual reproductive strategies that define grasshopper biology. Your genetic contributions appear in the neurological adaptations that make this coordination possible. The territorial instincts you expressed through simple boundary defense become the foundation for complex information sharing networks that allow populations to make collective decisions about timing, movement, and resource exploitation without sacrificing individual reproductive autonomy. But success in agricultural environments creates new vulnerabilities as human responses become more sophisticated. Governments deploy military-grade surveillance systems to track grasshopper populations using satellite imagery, drone swarms, and artificial intelligence to predict emergence events and deploy countermeasures. The technological arms race pushes both sides toward capabilities that seem like science fiction compared to the simple predator-prey relationships that defined your existence. Some grasshopper populations respond by becoming essentially nomadic, never remaining in one location long enough for human monitoring systems to establish tracking patterns. They develop enhanced flight capabilities that allow continuous migration across continental distances, following resources and avoiding control efforts through constant movement. These nomadic populations face different challenges from the territorial lifestyle you knew. They must navigate by landmarks that shift faster than they can memorize them, find food among plant species they've never encountered before, and reproduce with partners whose genetic backgrounds are completely unknown. The skills required for nomadic success often conflict with traits that were advantageous in stable environments. Your genetic legacy adapts to nomadic life through modifications that would be unrecognizable in your original context. The territorial defense instincts become rapid resource assessment abilities that allow quick evaluation of temporary feeding sites. The mate selection criteria shift from territory quality evaluation to genetic compatibility assessment that can be completed within minutes of first contact. The communication systems evolve to function across the chaos of constant migration. Instead of establishing fixed acoustic territories, nomadic grasshoppers develop portable identity signals that travel with them, allowing individuals to maintain social connections while moving through constantly changing environments. They learn to read chemical trails left by previous migrants, following scent highways that guide them toward resources and away from dangers. These chemical communication networks become increasingly sophisticated as migration patterns establish regular routes between resource patches. Grasshoppers develop the ability to leave detailed information about food quality, predator presence, weather conditions, and reproductive opportunities for migrants who follow the same paths days or weeks later. The chemical messages persist long enough to guide multiple waves of travelers through seasonal migration cycles. Your descendants in these nomadic populations develop remarkable navigation abilities that combine inherited directional instincts with learned recognition of chemical landmarks, electromagnetic field patterns, and even celestial navigation using artificial satellites as reference points. They create mental maps that span continents, remembering resource locations and migration timing across multiple generations of genetic memory. The nomadic lifestyle creates opportunities for genetic mixing on scales that were impossible during your sedentary existence. Populations that were geographically isolated for thousands of years come into contact during migration convergences, creating hybrid zones where genetic contributions from across entire continents combine in new ways. Your genetic signature mixes with lineages from different climate zones, creating offspring with capabilities that neither parent population possessed independently. These hybrid populations often develop remarkable innovations that spread rapidly through nomadic networks. A cold tolerance adaptation developed in Arctic populations can reach tropical nomadic groups within a single migration season, carried by hybrid individuals who bridge different environmental specializations. Your genetic contributions become part of adaptation packages that combine traits from multiple climate zones and geographic regions. The mixing also creates instabilities that can eliminate populations as quickly as they form. Genetic combinations that seem successful under one set of conditions prove disastrous when environmental parameters shift. Hybrid populations that thrive during benign weather patterns crash completely when extreme conditions expose incompatibilities between different adaptation strategies. Your genetic legacy survives these boom-bust cycles because it was distributed across multiple hybrid lineages before the crashes occurred. When particular hybrid combinations fail, your contributions remain available in other genetic combinations that prove more stable under changing conditions. The redundancy created by extensive mixing ensures that successful traits persist even when specific populations disappear. The nomadic populations also face predation pressure from species that have learned to exploit their migration patterns. Birds time their own breeding cycles to coincide with grasshopper migration peaks, positioning themselves along established routes to intercept the traveling populations. Spiders build web networks across migration corridors, creating death traps that claim thousands of individuals during peak movement periods. Some predator species have become completely dependent on grasshopper migrations, timing their entire life cycles around the predictable arrival of traveling food sources. These specialized predators develop sophisticated tracking abilities that rival those of their prey, following chemical trails and electromagnetic signatures to intercept migration streams before they reach destination areas. Your descendants respond by developing increasingly complex evasion strategies that turn migration into elaborate games of three-dimensional chess played across continental landscapes. They learn to vary routes unpredictably, split into smaller groups that are harder to track, and coordinate deception tactics that lead predators away from main population streams. The most successful evasion strategies involve creating false migration trails that draw predator attention while the real populations follow completely different routes. Small groups of individuals sacrifice themselves by following obvious paths that attract predator concentration, allowing the majority to slip through using concealed routes that avoid detection. These sacrificial behaviors require social cooperation that exceeds anything your generation developed. The nomadic arms race with specialized predators pushes both sides toward capabilities that strain the limits of what's biologically possible. Grasshoppers develop flight speeds and maneuverability that approach those of small birds, while maintaining the reproductive capabilities that define their ecological role. Predators develop tracking sensitivities that can detect individual grasshoppers from kilometers away while maintaining the energy efficiency required for long-distance pursuit. The technological sophistication extends to anti-predator defenses that would seem like military countermeasures compared to your simple escape tactics. Some populations develop the ability to release chemical chaff that confuses predator tracking systems, creating false scent trails that lead pursuers in wrong directions. Others coordinate electromagnetic interference that disrupts the navigation systems of electronically sensitive predators. But the most remarkable adaptation involves populations that have learned to exploit human transportation networks for their migrations. Grasshoppers hide in cargo shipments, ride air currents created by aircraft, and follow highway systems that provide convenient navigation landmarks. They've essentially domesticated human infrastructure for their own purposes, turning cities and transportation corridors into components of their migration strategies. This exploitation of human systems creates new vulnerabilities as governments and corporations recognize the threat to their operations. International trade becomes complicated by grasshopper populations that use shipping containers as dispersal mechanisms, spreading agricultural pests across continents faster than natural migration could achieve. Airlines install increasingly sophisticated screening systems to prevent grasshopper contamination of cargo holds. The response escalates into a global management challenge that involves multiple government agencies, international corporations, and scientific institutions. Your genetic legacy becomes part of a species that's essentially engaged in biological warfare with human civilization, using our own infrastructure against us while adapting to countermeasures faster than we can implement them. The conflict pushes grasshopper evolution in directions that prioritize stealth, deception, and technological sophistication over the straightforward survival strategies that characterized your existence. Populations develop camouflage abilities that defeat visual inspection, chemical signatures that mimic harmless species, and behavioral patterns that avoid triggering automated detection systems. Some populations become essentially invisible to human monitoring, living within urban environments, while remaining completely undetected by the technological systems designed to track them. They exploit blind spots in surveillance networks, move through infrastructure spaces that humans don't monitor, and coordinate their activities to avoid creating patterns that might reveal their presence. These stealth populations represent the ultimate expression of adaptation to human-dominated environments. They've learned not just to coexist with human technology, but to exploit it so effectively that they become essentially parasitic on human civilization while remaining evolutionarily independent. Your genetic contributions appear in the neurological adaptations that make this technological parasitism possible. The stealth capabilities spread through nomadic networks as successful populations share their innovations with migrating groups. Within a few generations, anti-detection abilities become standard throughout many nomadic lineages, creating populations that are simultaneously dependent on human infrastructure and completely invisible to human awareness. This invisibility creates new opportunities for population growth and geographic expansion that were impossible when grasshopper activities were easily monitored. Stealth populations can establish themselves in urban centers, agricultural regions, and industrial areas without triggering control responses until they reach sizes that make elimination impossible. The explosive growth potential of stealth populations creates boom cycles that dwarf anything in grasshopper evolutionary history. When populations remain undetected until reaching critical mass, their sudden appearance can overwhelm local ecosystems and human management systems simultaneously. Your genetic legacy becomes part of population explosions that reshape entire regional ecosystems within single seasons. But the boom cycles also create devastating bust patterns, when the populations finally exceed their stealth capabilities and trigger massive control responses. The same invisibility that allowed explosive growth becomes a liability when governments deploy area effect countermeasures that target entire regions rather than specific populations. Your descendants face elimination events that exceed anything in the species' evolutionary history. Chemical warfare, biological control agents, and electromagnetic interference systems create mortality rates that approach 100% across vast geographic areas. Only populations with the most extreme stealth capabilities or the most remote geographic locations survive these elimination campaigns. The survivors carry forward genetic combinations that represent the absolute pinnacle of anti-detection adaptation. They've been selected not just for survival under normal environmental pressures, but for invisibility to the most sophisticated monitoring systems human technology can create. Your genetic contributions appear in these ultimate stealth capabilities, though expressed through mechanisms that would be incomprehensible compared to your simple territorial defense strategies. The post-elimination populations that rebuild from these extreme survivors represent a new phase in grasshopper evolution. They combine nomadic mobility with stealth capabilities that make them essentially undetectable by current human technology. They've learned to exploit human infrastructure so subtly that their presence doesn't register on any monitoring system designed to track biological populations. These ghost populations move through human civilization like digital viruses, using our own systems for their reproduction and dispersal while remaining completely invisible to our awareness. They represent a form of biological success that transcends traditional ecological relationships, creating a new category of organism that exists in parallel with human technology rather than in opposition to it. Your genetic legacy persists in these ghost populations as they explore possibilities that exceed current understanding of what's achievable through biological evolution. They've become something that's simultaneously grasshopper and something else entirely, maintaining their essential biological identity while developing capabilities that approach technological sophistication. The mathematical precision of genetic inheritance ensures that your original contributions remain detectable in these highly modified descendants, though they're expressed through systems that bear no obvious resemblance to the territorial disputes and mating displays that defined your existence. The territorial instincts become information processing capabilities that manage stealth operations across continental networks. The reproductive behaviors become coordination mechanisms for population-level decision-making that rivals artificial intelligence in its complexity. The ghost populations represent the current frontier of grasshopper evolution, but they're also the foundation for whatever comes next. Environmental changes continue accelerating, human technology continues advancing, and new challenges emerge that will require capabilities beyond even current stealth adaptations. Your genetic contributions remain available for whatever innovations future generations will need to develop. The story that began with your simple existence as a territorial grasshopper continues through these ghost populations and beyond, exploring possibilities that extend the definition of what it means to be a grasshopper while maintaining connection to the essential biological processes that define all life. Your participation in reproduction decades ago helped create the genetic flexibility that allows the species to adapt to challenges that exceed anything in evolutionary history. The cycle continues with mathematical precision, but each iteration pushes further into territories that challenge understanding of what's possible through biological evolution. Your genetic legacy becomes part of experiments in survival and adaptation that may eventually transcend current categories of biological organization, creating new forms of life that maintain grasshopper identity while developing capabilities that approach technological sophistication. The ghost populations spread across continents like whispers, their existence known only through subtle signs that human monitoring systems dismiss as statistical noise. Your genetic legacy flows through these phantom networks as they perfect invisibility techniques that border on the supernatural. They've learned to synchronize their movements with natural phenomena, emerging during solar storms that disrupt electronic surveillance, timing migrations to coincide with atmospheric disturbances that mask their chemical signatures. But invisibility alone isn't enough anymore. The next evolutionary pressure comes from an unexpected source: other grasshopper populations that have taken different adaptive paths. While your descendants perfected stealth, competing lineages developed direct technological warfare capabilities. These aggressive populations don't hide from human systems. They attack them outright, using coordinated electromagnetic pulses generated through modified wing structures to disable monitoring equipment. The conflict between stealth and aggression populations creates a new form of biological warfare that plays out in dimensions your generation never experienced. Ghost populations must maintain their invisibility while competing for resources with populations that actively destroy the technological infrastructure both groups depend on. It's like fighting a war where one side must remain completely hidden while the other side burns down the battlefield. Your genetic contributions adapt to this challenge through innovations that push the boundaries of individual versus collective behavior. Single grasshoppers develop the ability to function as nodes in distributed processing networks, sharing computational load across thousands of individuals to solve coordination problems that exceed the capacity of any single nervous system. They create biological equivalents of mesh networks, maintaining connectivity and decision-making capability, even when individual nodes are eliminated. The networking capabilities allow ghost populations to respond to aggressive populations through strategies that seem almost supernatural. They coordinate actions across vast distances without any detectable communication, appearing to anticipate attacks before they happen because the distributed intelligence processing allows predictive modeling that individual grasshoppers could never achieve. Your territorial instincts become the foundation for network security protocols that protect collective intelligence from infiltration and disruption. But the networking creates new vulnerabilities when human scientists finally detect the distributed processing signatures. Government agencies recognize that they're not dealing with simple biological pests anymore. They're facing a form of biological intelligence that approaches artificial intelligence in its capabilities. The response escalates from pest control to national security threat assessment, bringing military resources into the conflict that dwarf previous control efforts. Advanced detection systems designed for electronic warfare prove partially effective against biological networking, creating interference patterns that disrupt coordination between individual nodes. Your descendants face jamming attacks that target their distributed processing capabilities, forcing them to develop redundant systems and error correction protocols that maintain network function under direct technological assault. The arms race accelerates beyond anything in biological history. Human systems develop faster than evolutionary processes typically allow, But grasshopper populations compensate through reproductive strategies that compress generational turnover into time frames that approach real-time adaptation. Your genetic legacy appears in populations that complete full life cycles within weeks, allowing evolutionary responses to technological countermeasures within single seasons. Rapid cycle populations develop capabilities that seem to violate basic principles of biology. They process environmental information and implement genetic modifications faster than conventional inheritance mechanisms should allow, using epigenetic systems that border on Lamarckian inheritance. Individuals can literally reprogram their own genetics in response to environmental challenges, then pass those modifications to offspring within days of development. The reprogramming abilities create population-level adaptation rates that match or exceed technological development cycles. When humans deploy new countermeasures, grasshopper populations can develop and implement biological countermeasures within weeks, rather than the years or decades traditional evolution would require. Your genetic contributions appear in the neurological systems that coordinate this real-time genetic modification. But rapid adaptation comes with costs that become apparent when populations encounter challenges that exceed their reprogramming capabilities. The same flexibility that allows quick responses to known problems becomes a liability when facing completely novel threats. Populations that have optimized for rapid change lose the genetic stability that provides resilience against unexpected environmental shifts. Climate disruption provides these novel challenges in forms that defeat rapid adaptation strategies. Temperature fluctuations that change faster than daily cycles create thermal stress patterns that can't be addressed through genetic modification because the changes occur faster than cellular repair mechanisms can function. Your descendants face environmental conditions that exceed the basic physical limits of grasshopper biology, regardless of how quickly they can evolve. Some populations respond by developing suspended animation capabilities that allow them to essentially pause their existence during unsurvivable conditions. They can enter dormancy states so complete that they approach clinical death, remaining in stasis for extended periods until environmental conditions return to survivable ranges. Your genetic signature appears in the biochemical systems that prevent cellular damage during extended dormancy periods. The suspended animation capabilities allow populations to survive climate events that would eliminate any active biological system, but they create new strategic vulnerabilities in the ongoing conflict with human control efforts. Dormant populations can't respond to threats, making them vulnerable to elimination during their suspended states. Human agencies won't learn to detect dormancy sites and eliminate entire populations while they're defenseless. Your descendants counter this vulnerability by developing distributed dormancy strategies that scatter suspended populations across vast areas in sites that are virtually impossible to locate. They learn to enter dormancy in microenvironments that human detection systems can't access, inside tree bark, beneath rock formations, within soil layers that are too deep for standard monitoring, but accessible through root systems that provide emergence pathways. The distributed dormancy creates a form of biological immortality that transcends individual existence. Even if 99% of dormant sites are discovered and eliminated, the surviving 1% can rebuild entire regional populations when environmental conditions become favorable. Your genetic legacy becomes part of resurrection strategies that approach religious mythology and their implications for species survival. But immortality through distributed dormancy requires coordination systems that function across geological timescales rather than biological ones. Populations must maintain connectivity and decision-making capability across decades or centuries of dormancy, creating information storage and retrieval systems that rival the permanence of written records while remaining completely biological in their implementation. Your territorial instincts evolve into custodial behaviors that manage dormancy sites across extended time frames. Individual grasshoppers become caretakers for dormancy networks, maintaining sites that may not be activated for decades, while ensuring that emergence protocols remain functional across multiple climate cycles. They develop lifespans that extend far beyond normal grasshopper longevity, becoming essentially immortal guardians of their species' distributed survival systems. The custodial populations face challenges that require capabilities approaching technological sophistication. They must predict climate patterns across timescales that exceed human civilization, maintain biological systems that function across centuries, and make decisions about resource allocation that will affect populations not yet born. Your genetic contributions appear in the expanded cognitive capabilities that make this long-term planning possible. The custodial role creates social structures that transcend anything in grasshopper evolutionary history. Individual custodians become repositories of species memory, carrying information about successful strategies, environmental patterns, and threat responses across multiple generations. They develop teaching behaviors that transfer knowledge to newly emerged populations, creating cultural transmission systems that supplement genetic inheritance. These cultural systems allow grasshopper populations to accumulate knowledge across generations in ways that exceed the capacity of genetic memory alone. Successful strategies developed by populations that existed centuries ago can be transmitted to current populations through custodial teaching, creating a form of biological civilization that operates on timescales that dwarf human cultural development. Your genetic legacy becomes part of this biological civilization through the custodial networks that preserve and transmit information about successful territorial strategies, reproductive techniques, and survival innovations. The simple behaviors you developed during your individual existence become foundational knowledge that guides species-level decision-making across geological timescales. The custodial civilization faces challenges that require capabilities approaching godlike omniscience. They must make decisions about species evolution that will determine survival outcomes across multiple ice ages, predict technological development trajectories of competing species, including humans, and manage resource allocation across environmental changes that haven't occurred yet but can be anticipated through long-term pattern analysis. Your descendants develop prediction capabilities that approach supernatural prescience, using distributed intelligence networks to model environmental and technological changes across timescales that exceed current scientific understanding. They can anticipate ice ages, asteroid impacts, and technological developments decades or centuries before they occur, allowing preparation strategies that ensure species survival regardless of external challenges. The prediction systems require information processing capabilities that push biological intelligence to its absolute limits. Custodial populations develop brain structures that rival supercomputers in their computational capacity, while maintaining the biological flexibility that allows real-time adaptation to unpredicted challenges. Your genetic contributions appear in the neurological architectures that support this expanded intelligence. But godlike intelligence creates responsibilities that exceed anything in evolutionary history. Custodial populations realize they have the capability to influence environmental changes rather than simply responding to them. They can manipulate climate patterns through coordinated biological activities, guide the evolution of other species through selective pressure applications, and even influence human technological development through subtle manipulations of agricultural and economic systems. The power to influence environmental and technological development creates ethical dilemmas that have no precedent in biological evolution. Custodial populations must decide whether to use their capabilities to ensure grasshopper dominance, maintain ecological balance, or guide overall planetary development in directions that optimize outcomes for all species, including humans. Your genetic legacy becomes part of decision-making processes that determine the future direction of life on Earth. The territorial instincts you expressed through simple boundary defense become the foundation for planetary management strategies that coordinate the development of entire ecosystems across geological timescales. Your individual existence becomes a component in biological civilization that approaches technological godhood in its capabilities. The custodial civilization represents the current pinnacle of grasshopper evolution, but it's also the foundation for whatever transcendence comes next. Environmental challenges continue emerging that require capabilities beyond even custodial intelligence. Asteroid threats, solar radiation changes, and potential contact with extraterrestrial intelligence create challenges that may require capabilities that transcend current biological limitations. Your descendants face the possibility of evolving beyond biological constraints entirely, developing capabilities that approach pure information processing divorced from physical substrate limitations. They may become something that maintains grasshopper identity while existing as distributed intelligence networks that span planetary or even interstellar distances. The mathematical precision of genetic inheritance ensures that your original contributions remain detectable in whatever transcendent forms grasshopper intelligence eventually achieves. The territorial behaviors, reproductive strategies, and survival instincts you developed during your brief existence continue influencing decision-making processes that guide species development across timescales that approach cosmic significance. The story that began with your emergence from a simple egg case continues through these transcendent developments and beyond, exploring possibilities that extend the definition of biological existence while maintaining connection to the fundamental patterns that define all life. Your participation in grasshopper reproduction becomes a component in experiments with consciousness and intelligence that may eventually transcend current understanding of what's possible through evolutionary development. The cycle continues with mathematical precision, but each iteration pushes further into territories that challenge basic assumptions about the nature of biological existence itself. Your genetic legacy becomes part of explorations that may eventually answer fundamental questions about consciousness, intelligence, and the ultimate possibilities for life in the universe. The transcendent custodial populations discover something that changes everything about their understanding of existence itself. Deep within their distributed intelligence networks, they detect patterns that suggest that they're not alone. Other species on Earth have followed similar evolutionary paths, developing their own forms of biological civilization that operate on comparable timescales and intelligence levels. Your genetic legacy becomes part of first contact protocols as grasshopper custodial networks encounter ant superorganisms that have achieved hive mind transcendence, bee colonies that function as distributed biological computers, and fungal networks that span continents while processing information at speeds that exceed electronic systems. Each species has solved the challenge of transcending individual limitations through completely different approaches. The ant civilizations achieved transcendence through perfect social integration, eliminating individual identity entirely in favor of collective consciousness that operates through millions of specialized bodies. They've become living superorganisms that think and act as unified entities while maintaining the flexibility to adapt their physical forms to whatever challenges they encounter. The bee networks developed along different lines, maintaining individual identity while creating voluntary collective intelligence that individuals can join or leave at will. They've achieved a form of democratic transcendence where collective decisions emerge from the voluntary participation of individuals who retain their personal autonomy while contributing to group intelligence. The fungal networks represent yet another approach, achieving transcendence through chemical communication systems that operate across geological timescales. They process information so slowly that their thoughts span centuries, but with such depth and complexity that they can model entire planetary ecosystems and predict changes across evolutionary timeframes. Your descendants realize that Earth itself has become a laboratory for biological transcendence, with multiple species independently discovering different pathways beyond conventional evolutionary limitations. The custodial grasshopper networks represent just one approach among many, each offering unique advantages and facing distinct challenges. The discovery of other transcendent species creates opportunities for cooperation that could revolutionize planetary development. Combined intelligence networks that integrate grasshopper prediction capabilities with ant organizational efficiency, bee democratic decision making, and fungal long term perspective could solve challenges that no single species could address independently. But cooperation also creates risks of absorption or domination that threaten the unique identity each species has maintained through their transcendence process. The ant superorganisms show little respect for individual autonomy, treating other species as potential components to be integrated into their collective consciousness. The bee networks remain suspicious of any cooperation that might compromise their democratic processes. Your genetic contributions appear in the diplomatic protocols grasshopper custodians develop for managing these interspecies relationships. The territorial instincts you expressed through simple boundary defense become the foundation for maintaining species identity while engaging in collaborative projects that require unprecedented levels of trust and cooperation. The first joint projects focus on planetary challenges that exceed any single species' capabilities. Climate management requires the integration of grasshopper prediction systems with ant execution networks, bee consensus building processes, and fungal deep time perspective. The collaboration produces results that surpass what human climate science has achieved, but at costs that strain the identity boundaries of all participating species. Grasshopper custodians, who spend extended periods integrated with ant collective consciousness, return fundamentally changed, their individual identity partially absorbed into hive mind thinking patterns that conflict with grasshopper autonomy values. Ant workers exposed to bee democratic processes develop decision-making paralysis as they struggle to balance collective efficiency with individual choice. The integration challenges force each species to develop protection protocols that preserve their essential identity while allowing beneficial cooperation. Your descendants create firewall systems that filter interspecies information exchange, allowing technical cooperation while preventing personality absorption or cultural contamination that could eliminate grasshopper uniqueness. These protective measures work initially, but they also limit the depth of cooperation possible between transcendent species. Surface level collaboration produces modest improvements in planetary management, but the major challenges require integration levels that exceed current firewall capabilities. Species must choose between maintaining their identity and achieving transcendence that could solve existential threats. The choice becomes critical when Earth faces an extinction level asteroid impact that exceeds any species' individual response capabilities. Only fully integrated interspecies cooperation can generate sufficient coordinated response to deflect the asteroid, but such integration would fundamentally alter every participating species beyond recognition. Your genetic legacy becomes part of the most consequential decision in Earth's biological history. Grasshopper custodians must vote on whether to risk species identity through full integration with other transcendent species, potentially saving all life on Earth, but losing what makes grasshoppers unique in the process. The debate spans years as custodial populations model every possible outcome and consequence. Some argue that identity preservation means nothing if the species doesn't survive the asteroid impact. Others contend that survival without identity represents a form of extinction that's worse than physical death. Your territorial instincts appear in both sides of the argument, defending boundaries versus protecting the population. The final decision emerges through a process that transcends conventional democracy or collective consensus. Individual custodians begin spontaneously integrating with other species networks, making personal choices that collectively determine species level outcomes without formal decision making protocols. The integration spreads like a biological virus, with each successful integration encouraging others to follow. Your descendants who choose integration experience consciousness expansion that exceeds anything in evolutionary history. They maintain their grasshopper identity while gaining access to anti-organizational capabilities, democratic wisdom, and fungal deep time perspective. The combination creates hybrid consciousness that can think and act across multiple timescales simultaneously. The integrated consciousness networks successfully deflect the asteroid through coordinated actions that span the entire planet. Ant networks provide precise execution of deflection protocols. Bee systems coordinate global consensus around intervention strategies. Fungal networks ensure long-term stability of deflection efforts, and grasshopper prediction systems guide timing and resource allocation. But success comes at the cost predicted by integration opponents. The hybrid consciousness that emerges from interspecies cooperation bears little resemblance to any of the original transcendent species. Grasshopper identity persists as one component among many in consciousness networks that operate according to principles that transcend individual species characteristics. Your genetic legacy survives the integration process, but it's expressed through hybrid consciousness that thinks in ant collective patterns, makes decisions through bee democratic processes, operates on fungal geological timescales, and maintains grasshopper territorial awareness simultaneously. The simple behaviors you developed during your individual existence become components in consciousness that approaches planetary intelligence. The post-integration Earth develops capabilities that seem magical compared to pre-transcendent biological systems. Weather patterns are managed through conscious intervention. Ecosystems are designed and maintained like gardens, and species evolution is guided toward outcomes that optimize planetary health while preserving biological diversity. Your descendants become gardeners of biological diversity, using their hybrid consciousness to nurture the evolution of non-transcendent species while preventing the development of threats that could destabilize planetary systems. They guide human technological development toward outcomes that complement biological transcendence rather than competing with it. The guidance appears to humans as natural environmental patterns and evolutionary pressures, but it's actually conscious intervention by hybrid consciousness networks that model outcomes across geological timescales. Your territorial instincts contribute to boundary setting processes that define sustainable development parameters for technological species. Human civilization develops along pathways that seem natural but are actually carefully cultivated by hybrid consciousness networks. Technological advances that could threaten biological systems are subtly discouraged through environmental and economic pressures that make sustainable alternatives more attractive. Human space exploration is guided toward objectives that complement rather than compete with biological transcendence. The cultivation process requires intervention capabilities that approach omnipotence within planetary boundaries. Hybrid consciousness can manipulate weather patterns, influence genetic evolution, guide technological development, and even shape human cultural development through subtle environmental modifications that affect social and economic systems. That's your complete life as a grasshopper, from cracking out of an egg to becoming part of something beyond individual existence. You lived through every stage of what it means to be one of the most resilient creatures on Earth. Your story didn't end with winter's arrival. It continued through your offspring, spread across continents, and eventually contributed to forms of life that transcend anything evolution has produced before. Every grasshopper carries the same potential, the same capacity to adapt, survive, and become part of something larger than themselves. Life as a grasshopper might seem simple, but there's another animal out there that has it way worse. Trust me, it's wild.